Hello and welcome. It's August 16th, 2023. We're in the collective behavior discussion section of the Active Inference for the Social Sciences course in 2023. So perhaps let us all go around and give a opening introduction and or reflection and see who joins and what happens from there. But just so that everybody has said hello.
Jump right in. Hi, everyone. I'm Brun. 9 p.m. in South Africa, and yeah, just excited to be here and see what happens. So,
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm a graduate student in Indiana, and yeah, I'm excited to be here. And I guess my field of interest now is in knowledge management, and I think that figuring out how we collectively learn and can um, share information with each other is a really interesting topic, and I'd like to see how this would apply.
Hi, I'm Regina, and I'm from Guatemala, but I'm living in Spain, studying and doing experiments related to this topic and trying to learn a little bit of the um, theory that's behind it so we can, advance better. I'm excited.
Hello, my name is Sasha. I'm calling in from California. I'm also a graduate student. Yeah, just really enjoyed the spirited presentation last week and looking forward to a discussion.
All right, well, how about anyone can give a first reflection on collective behavior? What was their thought or context before, and where are they at as we kind of begin? Yeah, Regina.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that I understand because I took like two big lessons from your lesson, right? And the first one is that this famous model of active inference that has the agent and the environment and the Markov blanket in the middle, right? And just interacts with everything, right? So I think what I got from what you discussed, maybe I didn't have a good definition of an agent, but first that you can have that agent not be just an individual, but also your definition of an individual changes depending on what you want to study in the behavior, right? So an agent can be an ant, it can be an ecosystem, it can be an eye looking at something, or it can be a society, for example. And I think that's a big take for me because it changes a lot the concept of how to study things and use active inference just by changing how big the agent can be. So I don't know if I got that right, right? So first, that clarification.
So what is an agent?
Yeah, so I don't know if there's like a formal definition of an agent in active inference, right? But uh, if we want to study whatever we want to study, because I'm about study because I have to do experiments. Right? That's like my goal, whatever I'm doing. So I want to study whatever, I have to choose what's going to be my agent and the environment it has. So choosing the agent, you can do it to create a model or to make an experiment, whatever. But the choice you make, it will depend on your in what you understand as an individual or as an agent. I think so, right?
Awesome. Anyone have a thought on that?
No. if I continue with something, just to add something else, and this will be my and that I'm thinking is that also a big problem that we have, or I think I have, is that since I am part of the environment, you know the perspective of whoever is studying whatever it is, it's also going to be affecting it. So maybe scientists already decided, but I don't know, that we can never have an objective way of studying something if you're part of the environment of the agent. So I don't know, we already forgot it, or we already decided that's it. We cannot have objective observations of behavior in general. But you know, you always think about like the agent, the environment, and you studying it as something else, but this something else is also affecting it. So I see that as a problem, or maybe something that has to be said, like we are not objective because we're part of what it's affecting our agents in the behavior collectively too. So those are the thoughts I have to share.
Regina, I'm also new to all of this, so my preliminary understanding of what is an agent is anything that has any good reason to self-evidence and to itself, or to survive, that doesn't want to dissipate, that might delineate the boundary of what an agent is, that then sets up the boundaries with which it will, as you described, start interacting with the world, with the environment. So if something, as I understand it, if something has a reason to go on being, to survive, then it is an agent in the world.
Okay, but that agent could be anything, right? Like, is that what you're saying, right? Like, if he wants to survive, it can be an ant surviving individually, or a cell, or a group. Okay, yeah, that's like a good definition. Okay.
Yeah, Sasha?
Great points, Regina. So much to say there. It's something that I have experience with as a researcher in biology, is deciding the kind of the statistics or sampling approach to use, whether we're taking, one cell from one individual, or we're taking many cells from many individuals, and how to do the statistics and kind of sampling approach on that. That is an evergreen question that we're always reevaluating to see how to think about the independencies within biological systems. And then another thing that you mentioned was about the individual being part of the ecosystem. And that makes me think a lot about complexity science, and something that is addressed there in thinking about the interplay of the scientist and what they're studying. But yeah, thank you for those points.
Sasha, sorry, I'm not raising my hand, I'm just unmuting, if that's okay. Can you say a bit more about what you mean by complexity science?
Maybe muted? Oh, can't speak at the moment. Yeah. Complexity science has looked at agent-based modeling as a fundamental tool. John Holland, Signals and Boundaries, focusing on what, from an active inference side, we might say is like message passing or communication for the messages, and then boundaries with the whole discussion around the boundaries in the world, map territory fallacy, map territory fallacy, doing iterative modeling, Sasha brought up limited experimental resources in the scientific setting, and that's kind of analogous to the limited energy budget or attentional budget, ultimately, or just decision-making budget of the kinds of active entities that make sense to model, the ones that kind of have those characteristics. This is really the question of what makes something first principles, or what are the first principles. One aspect of it, as brought up, is the censoring of the persistence. So from the outside, that's kind of like an empiricist's view of persistence, like, is it measurable? But not saying that something is necessarily that, which is the statistical tool. And then the sort of like inside out implementation type. But there's a lot more to say in that. Who wants to bring in some new angle, or how do they see collective behavior? Why do we talk about collective behavior? Why not just behavior? Recognize that behavior is multi-scale or is social. What's really being communicated with the collective?
I mean, I believe that we chose those levels so we can make it more simple for our brains to understand it. Because if we talk about collective behavior, actually is the universe behaving and the particles and everything, right? So I don't know if that's a little bit just based on, I don't know what's the word, like just in the material world and how it physically moves, and that's like deterministic or whatever, right? But I think we chose to have those limitations so we could understand the world, but also we should acknowledge that are limited because we're part of the system.
I'm having a little trouble on my kind of understanding where the schism lies between kind of the Markov blanket and the Umwelt in semiotics of like the animal's sensory experience.
Anyone have
like maybe someone could I mean, Daniel, do you know like the difference between that two?
Can you be a little louder? Thank you, though. Andrew, anyone have a thought on that? I'll bring in a definition of Umwelt, and then we can see. But meanwhile, does anyone have a thought?
Daniel, we don't know if you're talking.
Oh, sorry, I was just muted on Zoom. Andrew, you're a little quiet, but I'm gonna bring in a definition of Umwelt, and then meanwhile, does anyone have a thought?
I hope I'm not further diluting Andrew's question, but I think of collective behavior in kind of like I don't know, a football team or a soccer team, and what that provides the group who is share some common ethos, and what that does to the how that regulates their collective or individual and collective free energies during a match or throughout the season, and how that gives some some charge to some investment, because it's my team against yours, and we have to try and win. And so, without that collective behavior, it might be far harder to achieve a group's goals if they aren't able to collaborate and share, implicitly and explicitly certain traits, behaviors, thoughts, feelings, ideals, ideologies, whatever they might be, and how that then allows us to compete in the world.
I see what you're saying. It's brain.
Yes.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Especially because we're watching the World Cup, right? Women's World
Right.
Cup, right?
Right. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so it's very relevant. Yeah, but I see that in all these things you've said, it seems that for you behavior needs to have like a goal, and I don't know if I agree with that. It's either survival or winning. But maybe for me, it's just something that happens, and maybe the consequence is surviving, but it's not the goal to survive or to win the game. I mean, in the football it is, right? But in general, maybe there's no goal to the behavior collectively. Just a thought.
It's interesting.
Yeah, a lot of great comments. Well, the paper of Connor Hines et al. On the collective behavior as surprise minimization that points the way towards using the active ontology, these kinds of modeling approaches for collective behavioral situations, and really just recognizing them as a certain type of behavioral modeling. The simplest case might just be a single closed system, all part of the composition that leads to the ability to describe, at very least, a lot of different kinds of systems, just like a linear model can describe a lot of systems. So then it's also really interesting, a topic that came up in one of the recent textbook groups with what's normative about active inference, because the term of the process theory even of active inference being normative is mentioned multiple times, and that's definitely a topic that connects to the social sciences. One can imagine the kind of niche normativity or niche regularities in a broad sense, and then the real minute particulars of how they play out, which kind of hints at the kind of descriptive or causal minimum to start making some anything but toy specific generative models. So it's been an interesting theme to see even already in Avel's and Ben's lectures and discussions. This question between description, process of describing, which is what I associated with Professor Gordon's approach to ant watching, how that descriptive process, which is what we can say that we have for active inference, just like a linear modeling ecosystem could say about their linear modeling in principle, and how to then articulate the normativities of the framework, if that concept, if that separation can even exist from the behavioral normativities that include the basis of social fabric in all different kinds of communities. Here's another question. So, what is the role of any technical detail in the social sciences? whether more on the statistical, connecting with data, or more category theoretic like just formal? What's the role of formal methods in different kinds of academic or practical expressions about social systems? Does it matter at all how we think about a framework at all?
Well, for formalizing aspects of a social system, I would say that the purpose is for communication between individuals, because just, we can't verify that. Well, formalizing it is just setting a system on top of what you're observing, but there is no explicit guarantee that what you're saying encompasses everything of the phenomena you're observing. And just like, kind of going back to Taoism of like, the name that can be named is not the true eternal name. And so it's just a way of, it's a slice of what we can observe, and the way to, maybe you can make predictions, or maybe you can generate something that acts like the phenomena you're observing. But so it's a way to kind of, it's just a way to kind of approximate our understanding of some phenomena, and you have to slice it in a specific way, but also understanding that it is a slice, or it is a tangent line that you're approximating, as opposed to encompassing the whole system from verbalizing it.
I will also add, maybe it's not the goal, but something that happens out of describing any system, like Andrew said, it's like the goal to modify it, or to corrupt it in some way to gain control or whatever. If you know the model, you know how to play the game, kinda. So you write instructions and try to see if you can outsmart someone else. I mean, it sounds kind of dark, right? But maybe it's one of the goals too, or it's something that just happens out of knowing the rules that nobody else knows.
I mean, I guess when you talk about control, there is a shade that can be gained from that specific wording, but control in terms of control theory, or that comes from electrical engineering, and it's really just what shapes the behavior, or what are the inputs that drive the behavior. And when you're talking about control, it's really just about well, if you change these inputs, how does that change the end behavior? And so you can actually, from electrical engineering, of controlling some sort of electromechanical system, but then you can make analogous statements on like control into society, which doesn't necessarily mean like the dark negative control, but like maybe there's some pathological behavior in a society, or even pathological pathological responses within the brain. And it's like, well, what is driving that, and is it possible to change change the drivers of that to have something that is more beneficial to the system?
Yeah, just to add to what Andrew's saying, because it matters sometimes how you manipulate a system, or it matters how you affect a brain. So it cannot be random. I mean, we've come a long way, for example, from lobotomy, which had disastrous effects, and it matters to a system how you affect it. And so to know more formally the most effective way to create a desired effect, whatever that might be, it's essential that it's not just kind of poking and prodding, because that is, yeah, as much as that is part of the scientific method, to update that method in accordance with what you're learning, so it is important.
No, I think you're both right. It doesn't have to be dark. But also something else that Andrew said about predicting, I think that's one of also the big goals, trying to predict whether to be prepared to, or just to, I mean, it couldn't be to control, right? But if you can somehow predict how people respond to this, or how a system will behave in this other scenario, you can, change what the input is, or prepare for whatever comes, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of great points. Some of the commonly held, not equally by everyone, but some of the tenets of science being to explain, predict, design, and control, where explanation and prediction are on the pathway towards systems designing and maintenance, and other words that people can add. But that's the pragmatic, utility-oriented view, which doesn't have to be an absolutist view, but certainly there are regimes of attention socially now and seemingly for long times where people were wanting to retain and to constrain the variance distribution on what we would say is their generative model, some norm, and then other times engaging in these functions. And that instrumentalist usage of active inference is like, we're going to be able to model it with a pretty minimum framework that's commonly used in statistical systems, where some things we observe and some we don't. And at least we know and how all the pieces are connected. And then that is an artifact in model-based design as people develop that line through time socially. Just like probably has been always the case for complex projects and scientific collaboration. There's a few other interesting pieces, but yeah, please.
I'm just wondering if, well, now that I'm thinking out loud, isn't that like a problem for confirmation bias, right? Like there's a paper in here, because we create the knowledge and we tell everyone the knowledge, this is the model, this is how everything behaves, and then we update our knowledge about it, and then we look for everything to just, confirm it, and yeah, maybe there's other system that will not let us be getting knowledge so slowly, because if everybody just agrees on something, we teach it to everyone and we confirm the model, and then we just try to look for evidence for that model, then we go slowly if there's any better thing or better model that comes along.
Yeah, a lot to say about that. Like, if we believe that trees exist or that people exist, and then we come to see them. So there's kind of this sense where problem confirmation bias, which I think is a great term, a great topic to bring in, with definitely also what's called like the golden nail syndrome or something. If all you have is the hammer, then everything's a nail. And there's definitely a tension there, because it's like, how much of what you can do are you supposed to do? Something that you can't do? But then at least you could do what you needed to do to get there. So that's actually within your scope of what you can do. So it's not that there are things that you can't do that you can't do, if just from a measurement perspective. So, like, how does it look, or how do we recognize across systems, or how do we have awareness in situations as limited individuals who do have all of these cognitive phenomena, how to make decisions or sense making or infrastructure or whatever it is, the socialness, the system of interest of the social sciences, make that, and then ... normatively what?
I think there's some protection built into the problem of confirmation bias, because all knowledge generation is happening in an open system, and so there's always going to be an agent outside of your own mind and what it's perceiving, and that can then challenge or add to the, like the LK99 semiconductors that has been all the rage recently, and how other scientists have now kind of discredited it quite convincingly, and it's because of this open. They might have had degrees of confirmation bias that they were egging each other on, but it's ultimately been refuted, which is this built-in kind of protection, because it's all operating in an open system, fortunately.
Yeah, a lot to say there. Monday morning reviewer twoing. How do we again go from any given description of a communicative event, like the kind of specific unfolding of the LK99 narrative, as yet uncompleted, in the minds of some, which is real enough to be real socially, and so how do we go from any descriptive anything about that total observation to coarse graining? Then how do we come to work with that interface with whatever that is hands that to us? What is the social behavior? What are some classic or some novel social behaviors? Maybe ones that seem pretty obvious due to recency bias. I'll just mention one aspect that Andrew and I have also talked about, is the autopoietic nature of information systems. Andrew, do you have any thought on this, or about where autopoiesis comes into, like, social sciences or these kinds of models?
Daniel, Andrew just left a note that he's needs to step away momentarily. So he'll
totally
be back.
He just wasn't looking at the time. Funny stuff. Anyone else have a thought on that? Okay, just to kind of carry it forward then. Basically, the ability of social systems that include written niche modification, cumulative culture, their increasing extent of control. As discussed earlier, that definitely is a bit of a overloaded, or at least doubly meant term in different settings, because it can just simply mean modeling it with control theory, which is a pretty limited philosophical statement relative to any statistical method, or control like the kind that people are unhappy with, and the kind that's described in Thinking Like a State, and a lot of other works that I know Mahault and Lorena and Avel are going to be definitely going into more detail on. So when societies can model and introspect or self-reflect formally much better. And that can happen through anything from free and open source federated protocols. There's many limited formats of self-meaning making, but cryptography definitely allows those explorations. And that doesn't necessarily mean computer cryptography. That could also be like linguistic encoding and all these other ways of niche sub-differentiation in multi-scale systems. You just do not see a system that is cookie cutter. It's very rare in ecosystems. There's algal blooms and things like that. So when we really think about the developmental and the cognitive and the selective niche, which is a concept that Axel Constant and others have differentiated in some of their like ecological active inference work, like that niche is very embodied, extended, encultured, etc., etc. It's just like a kind of cool, direct way to open up to that challenge of modeling and just bring some closures with different accounts or compatibilities with different accounts. So like all, just to give one random example, but maybe it'd be interesting what other people think. All the expressions that people make in social settings can just simply be their expressions or modeled as such. That is, in one way, implicitly what was always in play, but now it's describable and legible and autonomous. So how do we take this active inference collective behavior crossover and think about what it really means in how we're going to be like thinking differently, even just this discussion forward, or like more locally our understandings with collective behavior or with behavior?
Daniel, can you ask the question again? I didn't actually catch
How do we
the question.
start to adapt some of these general comments or frames that are in some ways disconnected from descriptions of real systems? How do we think about that and what it means now?
Mm-hmm.
What is
do you
it?
mean
What is
on
it?
the?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay.
Do you mean on the document in front of us?
Oh.
These disconnected things in front of us that on the document.
I don't know. Whatever you think or whatever you want to say.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is a lot, and I hope I'm not fully understanding the question. I hope I'm not steering away too much, but I had a general sense of what I think you were saying, and I think it's an enormous problem with the amount of information sharing. Just let's just take the generative models of social media and all of the platforms that are available to us, how much information we are privy to in any given moment. And I'm kind of forgetting the question that you asked. But how do you? It's almost as if there is such a high rate of information and data flow that it's really hard to know what to do with all of it. At least as a human being, I'm not saying for machines, but as a psychologist, I'm certainly interested in how humans are able to tolerate and respond to the amount and rate of information that's out there.
I mean, this is not the first time this happens, right? Like when we went from talking to writing information, then everyone wrote their information, and then we have books, and then we have libraries, and that's all available. And again, we have access, if you can read, right, to all the information in the world. So we adapted to, I don't know, to get careers so we could specify in which type of information you are going to know more. So maybe we need some sort of new career types, I don't know, more specification with more information.
But is it not, is the rate of information flow and increase, is it not exponential? Is it not?
I don't know, it's a crazy amount, and our brains cannot do anything about it. So we have to do multidisciplinary things and work together with others if we want to make something. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe we will die of excess of information.
How do people feel like active inference brings something to the discussion relative to how they want to work towards? Ants? Yeah, well, isn't that the provocative question too? But like any system, that's the question. Everyone is gonna have their own memes and themes and systems that they have spent time with and did field work with and all this other like particularity. Because a system that doesn't have particularity is just not gonna be hosting a broad enough niche for phenotypic diversity. It's just riding on the edge of a razor instead of more like a fabric that continues to unfold, I think. There's a lot of work to do with the social sciences and active inference, just from what I was like reading, trying to find things for this discussion. And just I personally wondered what is meaningful or interesting or useful. What's epistemic and pragmatic value for different audiences? How does it go from kind of bringing citations that were not linked together in some more theoretical or more generative model oriented work in active inference, like epistemic foraging or the inference model or any other kind of specific model? What do these different kinds of scientific artifacts do for who?
I guess I'm still learning very very kind of crudely plodding along here, Daniel, to try and answer that, because I've quickly realized that the field it's so multinodal. It has so much the free energy principle, the Bayesian brain, even just to psychology, has so much applicability. And everyone I meet at these discussions is coming at it from a different angle. And it can be a bit confusing to hear how other people are applying it, how other people are making use of it in all manner of ways. And so I'm still learning how to apply to kind of ring fence the free energy principle and connect it to psychological processes, including collective behavior, because there's a lot of psychopathology in groupthink in collective behavior. But I'm also very, very interested in its application at the interface of what happens between a therapist and a patient. I'm often, unlike other professions who are just by nature of the scientific method, are able to extract a lot more data to work with, to analyze, to in a that's very hard to do. I feel very limited, other than just making kind of theoretical leaps and inferences about how to apply the free energy principle to psychology. I can't have a session with my brain hooked up to an fMRI machine to get data and to see when a patient says boo or bar, that's a spike on the spike trains, which represents surprisal, and we can then solve for that in some way. I don't have access to that sort of data flow, so it feels limited, but I'm still learning how to apply it. And trying to collaborate with colleagues on the inference group.
What are people wondering about collective behavior? Even if we're totally, of course, not going to address it, but just what are the kinds of things that people... What makes you look up collective behavior instead of just behavior or individual behavior?
For me, it's about safety and need to belong.
For me, it's I think that it depends where you come from and the country you are, but there are places that are more collective and there are places that are more individualistic. And I think mostly non-Western countries have a lot of collective behavior and knowledge and spirit already, right? That they already knew these things that we think are new for us, right? How the collective thing works. For example, I don't know, you don't make a decision for yourself, you make a decision for the group, like marrying. You marry because you want an addition, you want to interact with someone or other group, and that's something that affects the collective, not just you. So arranged marriage makes sense, something like that, right? So for me, making that distinction about individual collective comes from understanding that, I don't know, there are other places that are already ahead in what collective means in terms of human beings and how to interact. And the Western world, we have all this individualistic thing, which is very interesting, because why do we have a same species and then we have very different approaches of how to understand ourselves in terms of what an individual is and why it matters?
yes, there's so much loaded on different understandings among people, including even the essence of the social, which is who are people and what is the obligation and how do we view that relationship. That's a very, very deep area, and again, the part that just kept returning to me in the lecture, and when I was trying to think about how to even reflect part of this very large area, is like, what is the adjective doing, and what's the reference point by which this is being said in the speech act. Like, people often will dismiss, I don't mean to straw people, but dismiss collective behavior by saying, well, we are explaining individual behavior. What are you explaining beyond the nestmates in the colony? And then the exterior, like, that is it. And so that can feel like looking at the same thing from two different sides. And there are different methods, like some methods blur over individuals a lot more, like statistical methods that might correspond to demographics. And then on the other hand, like more agent-based models. But how much variability and what shared variability and what general synchronies amongst different quantum reference frames, all these nested, at least possibilities that are grounded in wanting to explore mathematical and scientific possibilities, as the literature of linear regression is full of so many incredible extensions and similar. And then that's, I think, what the course is even beginning to try to express, and what I understand in the works of the other teachers and like a lot of your backgrounds and everything like that, is where is that moment where it is not only science, because science is not simply the social. So science as an activity, and then as there's a diffusion away from science, and I think that, or at least that relationship between social and science is right there in the title. Maybe that's kind of like a science major's take, but it is itself in a way presenting a dilemma with what science means there, and then that's the frame game. Who's doing social science? Who's doing not social science? And that's where in the culture I'm sitting in / in the technical side of that, it is related to statistics and formality. It's the XKCD comic, and the way that formalisms and details are taken as, under some regimes of attention, basically definitive. And yet there's like a yearning and a counterbalancing that's expressed also in many ways. And so that's, and science, maybe some people feel like certain social scientific methods, that's like not far enough in this dimension. And then the others feel like they're too far in this direction. But it's like, just like any, like that academic field, let alone any other community of diverse agents, like, of course there's going to be distributions of perspectives at different times.
And rate of uptake by those different perspectives. And Daniel, do you think these first principles would be able to explain why an ant colony exists? I know that was your kind of area of interest of study. Why an ant colony exists in the way that it does, as a collective, operating as a collective, and why another animal is able to survive and achieve its goals as an individual, only relying on the environment and its actions and sensations to get its needs met and to no doubt minimize its free energy. But could first principles explain why the one has to survive as a group and the other has to survive or is able to survive under different conditions?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question. It's very core to this individuation and multi-scale individuation concept. Like, is the nestmate the individual and then the colony is the social? Because then for sure it's super collaborative. Or is the colony the organism and nestmates are tissues? And then are they social across colony boundaries? Not where I was in Arizona. But they're often friendly across different species and they avoided conflict more often than not. So it's like, what? And then you go, wait, why does it even matter what's happening on this plot of land in this area from like a biomimicry perspective? We might learn new algorithms. It's a sandbox for learning new techniques and observation, all these other like richnesses. So it's to say though, like, what comes away from that science that makes it social science? And I think there's a lot of disciplinary ways of understanding that, which I'm definitely not expert in the professional fields like counseling, but probably in all the different humanities and histories and all these other fields, all these different maps, the kind of social, the epistemic organizing question, and then the social organizing question.
Yeah.
And the way that like technology is also in that tangle. And so, yeah, someone pointed out like this is not a new problem. And but then it's like, well, what parts are new? And then what's our model by which we're saying that it's like new or too individualist or too collective? On what scale? What if they're like really collectivist at this scale but not at this scale? Or an example of an ambiguous or at least like polysemous phenotype of colonies is in some colonies there's partial reproductive activation of like non-reproductive nestmates, and that has often been modeled from like a position of like zero is the law and how are they cheating above this. But it's also been approached from a colony level strategic bed hedging. So without super deep knowledge of really some of the specifics of the regularities that colony algorithm had to persist for so long, and to have gotten swept off the table, if it was even, it's like that's a very integrated problem. So it helps you approach collective systems and learn about them, but it's like there's a lot to say about humidity loss in foraging, and humidity loss isn't even the whole picture. And human foraging is a lot more sophisticated from just like a perception, cognition, influence perspective. So those are just some ant-related thoughts. But it just centers a lot of discussions that really matter. And I think the really interesting piece is not always in the way that they're thought to by some.
Yeah, and it's very hard to get any kind of cross-pollination or to see cross-pollination studying one agent. It's quite, or at least to my mind, very difficult to kind of generalize things across different agents. It starts getting a bit tricky to infer one collective's why, how and why and how they survive and how another agent does. It's tricky. So I'm almost just going to make an agent, human beings, as hard as they are to study, and just try and run with it as far as possible. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just information overload.
body's a complex place too. And digital technology, virtuality. These are such richly developed topics in the social sciences. I only know the tiniest amount from, but I think that through participation and inclusion in collaboration and in conversations and everything, there's going to be a lot of interesting connections and paths. And it's being approached seemingly on multiple layers, like within the two layers that just we can focus most narrowly on is like within the realm of science. What is science? Which is kind of like playing this other role with inertia in some people's minds and in systems. What is science? Who gets to decide what social science is? I don't know. I'm not in social science, but it's system of inertia society, and certainly I'm a part of that. So it's like, what is good technically? What is social scientific? And then what is that social scientific? How does that gonna interface into the metaphysical questions and the normative ethical and the decision making with trade-offs and the real reflexive complex decisions that matter, also while recognizing this increasingly nuanced way of thinking about different social intelligences. What's any other random thought or curiosity about collective behavior? One point that I would have added into the lecture was just that in distributed systems, whether as modeled or as such, all behavior is arising from interactions local to individuals. Even if it's sent through some wireless mechanism, it's like all about the local interactions. And so that is an arising type process that gives the modeler like one hands-off layer at least, if not much more. Another nice feature about them, they are in a way waiting to be composed because they intrinsically contain like at least two layers of consideration. Now, whether there's kind of like a forcing function of one layer and just sort of dangling a bottom layer, or whether there's a lot of what we would call emergence or discussive in that way, like that more arising function can be modeled. But in either way, then you can kind of wrap that two-layer system and then compose them. So that's like what enables in certain situations like parallelization. Or at least, you know, that's obviously a big area, but that's what allows multi-agent simulation frameworks to do well on certain very challenging sense-making and action selection problems, not by guarantee or default, because any given slicing and dicing of any given prompting of information may not help you adapt. But there are paths that do and don't help persist or not. And that's this kind of persistence starting place that we began with. Sasha?
Yeah, I really resonate with what you mentioned about the local interactions, that even if information is transmitted over long distances, then the agents behave in a way that is locally relevant and integrates that information. And it actually makes me think a lot about the like psychology therapy angle, that while you try to get information about the person's like sort of local environment and behavior, or like perhaps, you know, demographics and age, that there informational environment and like a wealth of what kind of information they consume might also be really telling about their psychological and like behavior interactions or pathologies. And then to bring it kind of full circle back to that the researcher is part of the ecosystem that they are studying. I think it's just such a difference in perspective to see that as like a positive and a gift, that the way that you would design and run an experiment today is not the way that you would do it 2 years from now with more experience. And so that is a benefit and like a bonus in the system, and not like a negative perspective of bias that it's detracting from some underlying truth or reality. So just a few thoughts.
Oh, very interesting. Anyone want to add something? I think we didn't fully resolve this early question about the Umwelt term from ethology, behavioral research, observation science. Using the term to describe the world as it's experienced by a particular organism. I think a few different pieces, and there's a lot of discussion in discourse, so just to give it like a super short overview. The world, we might connect to world modeling, and there's a lot of interesting work in all kinds of different, like, pros focus on qualitative systems, as well as some artificial or synthetic intelligence world modeling. As it is experienced is one of the sticky and deep ones, because this is the area of phenomenology. And so this is like a kind of semi-eternal discussion point. So whether active inference delivers on world modeling is kind of empirical and just plain. Whereas as it is experienced is going to be a philosophical question. And then by a particular organism, that specificity we get by actually making the generative model. Even if we're just speculating about it, it's like talking about experience without an experiencer. Would be like talking about some agent's behavior without reference to its niche. And then where there is like that complex negotiation, I think the humanities and a lot of the social sciences have identified a lot of the structural, like top-down, and also the personal bottom-up motifs of things being blurred and made complex. And so I think part of the social and the scientific, as coming only from the scientific side, is like to meet in the third space, and or at least make it work to have a mutual compromise where it's like certain social oriented claims based upon this scientific measure that is going to be a judgment call, but understanding that conversation, where is it a mutual compromise in like what dimensions, not simply along the kind of like rigor or accessibility or implications axis. There's just very many things in play in these iterated relationships in ecosystems. Like having a researcher as part of the ecosystem, well, what is it? Here's the forager question. We see the nestmate on the ground, it's a forager. But then we step back, it's like, okay, well, it's foraging. And then that's the allocation of the forager. Then its foraging is still part of this sense-making, this generative sense-making with like process understanding, even of a trace, which is something that Bruno Latour and others have explored with like following a trace in a social setting and using that to trace networks. So in our digital ecosystems, though, our information ecosystems, is not research happening? And so what does that really mean? And then what are those social normativities? There's going to be like a meeting or a handoff with where that really is happening. Or maybe it's a knocking on the door that's ignored. Or it could be whatever metaphor in that setting it actually is. There's no general metaphor, because that'd be like, oh, what's the general metaphor on this experiment? Which experiment? Just the general action that we plan to take? Oh, hard to say. Okay, well, in our last, sections, I guess, if anybody types a question live chat, we'll look at it. Otherwise, what are any other thoughts or, what can we learn more about collective behavior? Or what will it mean for our sense-making, decision-making if we understand collective behavior better? What else are people excited about for the rest of the course? Based upon the sections that we've done so far, and how we can even start to approach this in an acknowledged, limited, finite way. Yeah, Sasha, then anyone else.
I just added a question to the very bottom of the notes, and it makes me think about how working on this document collaboratively throughout the last hour, we're able to kind of leave a stigmergic trace of things we've discussed, and what sort of traits or practices should individual humans, I guess I should specify humans, should we embody in order to improve cohesion in collective behavior. It makes me think of certain psychology traits or descriptions of openness or conscientiousness. What will make individual humans better participants in collective behavior?
Yeah, I think to add to that, to just emphasize the importance again, only with human agents, specifically who have the capacity to think and reflect, and the only ones that have those really advanced capabilities that we know of as yet, but to really kind of leverage in order to make the collective better, there's a responsibility of the individual, despite being part of a collective and on many different fronts, to be able to leverage and utilize their own internal states and what they have learned, and to be able to think to retain the individual's mind and think about the collective. I think is so important if the collective is to become healthier, Sasha, to your point, and to improve its, to become more conscientious, to become more responsible, or whatever that might be. So to always try and maintain a thinking self is crucial. Otherwise, you can very easily be usurped into the collective as is. If you just go on any social media platform, you will see individuals rarely thinking for themselves and seemingly kind of just fueling each other, and that causes massive problems. So an individual mind strikes me as being just the most important thing in the future going forward.
Yeah, this dialectic with individuation and collectivization as these like ongoing negotiated compromises that can be also viewed many ways, however they are. Cognitive science coming into play, maybe historical processes or philosophies were used in many settings for even approaching these kinds of social questions. And now with computer science and technology, it even like is a discussion more about the capacities of measurement and action. Not that those are new in and of themselves, but thinking like a state, like the development of the apparatus, the development of the social systems that can be run on open source hardware, open source software, things like that. So I don't know if something's generalized across all such groups, but understanding what environments, at least initially, things are beginning at is just a realist starting point. Probably no guarantee, since most things / all things are swept off the table in their specifics anyway. So, how to deal with that kind of like skin on the line type of decision making is very interesting, how it's pursued in the sciences, because often like many runs are presented, or that kind of like catastrophic failure mode of models is not considered. It's just like part of the training, starting naive. So just the way that different social considerations are converged upon, it's not like reduced to one feature of the social, because the social is such an open space. As a scientist, always impressed by how that writing could kind of open up the situations which are like mundane, but also, of course, very deep and meaningful. Also, though, mundane. Any other thoughts? Or otherwise, on collective behavior or on the social sciences course or anything? Otherwise, people can have any last words if they want. Yeah, awesome. Thank you all for participating. David, want to add anything?
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, well, I look forward to more questions being asked on the course website, and everybody's engagement with the course is very much appreciated. So keep up the collective /
for hosting it.
multi-scale learning, and it's a fun course. Really happy that we could have done this session, and very happy to have concluded the session. All right.
Cheers, Dan.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Ciao.